Okay, folks, welcome. Today I have something I want to talk to you about that I have a feeling may be a little bit confusing, but hopefully I can find the right words to communicate what I'm trying to get across to you guys. Now, I generally don't use UV or protection filters on my lenses, but I do sometimes use, specialty filters like CPLs, grads, polarizers, or special effects filters. But over the years, my basic feeling towards filters, and I've stated this many times on the channel, is that they can't improve your image quality. They can only hurt your image quality, but it's still worth using them sometimes. Now, what I mean by that is I've always argued that adding a layer of glass on top of your finely calibrated lens can't improve the overall image quality, as in like the sharpness and detail and glare and haze and vignette and all of those kind of things. A high quality lens has been designed and optimized with all of its coatings and different elements to give you the best possible result. So adding an extra piece of glass on front, in best case scenario, if it's a really high quality filter, will degrade the image by such a small amount that you don't even notice it. But if it's a really cheap, poor quality filter, then it can do so much. It can introduce big color cast shifts. It can really reduce your sharpness. It can add vignettes. It can bring in all kinds of flare and reflections, and it can really just ruin what would otherwise be a good image. But sometimes you just need to use an ND or a polarizer or a grad or a special effects filter to create the image that you have in your mind's eye. So the solution then is get a really high quality filter that degrades your image by the least possible amount and gives you the effect you want, and that's the compromise that we have to make. So to repeat, for a decade or more, my position has been that filters can't improve your image quality, they can only hurt it, but in some cases, it's still worth using them. Well, I'm wrong. I've been shooting and I've found an exception to that proves what I held to be wrong. Now, in this age where we find facts so often to support whatever it is that we want to believe, I'm instead going to adjust my beliefs in light of the new evidence that I have first-hand experience of using now. And I'm going to do that publicly. But before I eat my big slice of humble pie, and no doubt welcome comments of haha, I told you so, let me explain to you what I've been shooting with and how I got to this realization. So I was just in California shooting with Steph. We were at the beach, we were shooting in the desert, all kinds of different situations with bright sun and lots of reflections. So a perfect situation to be shooting with a CPL. So I found myself on a lot of shoots, I was making use of a CPL to get the best possible image quality. Now, for those of you who don't know, a CPL is a circular polarizer, circular PL polarizer, and they're really handy to own, no matter what style of photography you're shooting. Essentially, a polarizer cuts polarized light and reduces reflections. And circular just means that you can rotate it to move the angle of the polarization cutting. Now, imagine we have the sun coming down on this angle, and this is a body of water that we have in our image. And the sun's coming down on this angle and then bouncing back out on that angle, and it's handy in this case because that's a perfectly flat piece of water / glass in my desk. So what's going to happen in that case is that the sun is going to hit the water, and as it's reflected, it's going to polarize. And generally it polarizes parallel to the surface that it's just been reflected off. So in this case, it's going to be polarized along this angle. What that does is it introduces all kinds of reflections. It means you can't see through the glass. Now, what a circular polarizer does, if you rotate that so that the direction of the polarization of the filter matches the polarized light, it basically will cut that, and then you'll get rid of those glares and you'll be able to actually see through the water. So here's some examples using this guy that I've been shooting with in USA and Hong Kong and other places, showing you how you can do just that. Rotating the filter to get the direction of polarization right, that you're able to cut out those reflections and see through to what's in the water, essentially. It doesn't work with water only, but any reflective surface, and also the sky, as the light is being somewhat polarized as it passes through the atmosphere and is reflected off the water molecules there. You'll find if you rotate it to just the right angle that the blues in your sky get richer and any clouds will really give a nice pop. You can also cut back on reflections on anything that's reflective, including glass. So this can be great if you're shooting people through glass. Even if it's a soft light source, the reflections you're getting there, you're able to control how much and where you put the reflections, which can be really handy for portraiture. So essentially, a CPL can be helpful in so many situations. Basically, when you're shooting on bright sunny days, or in a studio situation if you have bright lights and you have reflective surfaces, it can get rid of those reflections and get rid of the glare that comes with it, give you more saturated colors and overall a nicer, punchier image. So in that case, using a high quality CPL is worth the potential degradation of your image. That's my general position. Now, so that I don't bury the lead too far into this video, let me just acknowledge what I've come to realize before explaining more of the how and why it happens. Okay, so you probably know this. Ghosting, flare, and reflections are the enemy of detail in your images. If you have, big reflection, like right now, I can see my light reflected in the glass. I can't see through there. So any detail that I would be getting of my eyes of the wood grain is being obscured by the reflections. Well, that can happen inside your lens as well. So when you look into a lens and you see those 10 or 12 different elements inside the lens, whilst it can look quite cool, all that light you're seeing, all those reflections, that's light that's bouncing back out of your lens that hasn't passed through the glass elements to your sensor, essentially cutting down the amount of light transmission of your lens. That's why lenses are rated not only in f-stops, which is how much light goes in, but also t-stops for how much light actually exits them. If you're interested, I'll leave a link below that explains more about what t-stops are and how they work. Now, the other thing that all of those reflections, and keep in mind they can be like bouncing off one element and back and forward, hitting different elements. You can get reflections depending on your lens setup, hitting your sensor and then bouncing back to the lens and then back to the sensor again. That all degrades your image quality. It can cause haloing, shadows, distortions, double edges, and an overall loss in sharpness in your image. So ideally, a lens manufacturer is considering, with CAD and all of that kind of thing these days, all of the different kinds of glass that they're using, the shape of all of the different elements, and then coating them differently at different points through the lens to cut down on all of those reflections so that you have the optimal transmission and the minimum number of reflections that are going on inside the lens. So we've got, Nikkor have their nano crystal coating, Zeiss have their famous T+ coating, most brands have their own different coating, and I can tell you it makes an absolutely huge difference on the image quality. I would say coatings probably had as big or bigger of an impact on the actual image fidelity of lenses as computer-aided design had to the design of lenses. So what if, now just bear with me, what if the coatings on your filter were more effective at cutting reflections than the front element on your lens actually is? Now that's something that I had never considered because it just never seems to be the case. Take a look at this footage. This is my brand new 85mm Nikkor lens. It's, latest generation cutting edge technology. Check out the amount of reflections we're getting on the outer surface, but then on all of the internal lens elements as well. Now, as I put the case CPL on, it's night and day. the filter's cutting back reflections and ghosting that would have resulted in reduced image quality. What that means is, as well as cutting polarized light, it's just cutting down the number of reflections that are entering into the lens, which thereby gives us the potential to be yielding more detail, more fine detail, more contrast in our shots, because that glare, flare, and ghosting won't be in the lens. Look, I understand if you're skeptical. I couldn't really believe it at first either. Take a look. Here's some footage filmed in 8K using my 85mm lens, no CPL, and here's a crop in to 100%. Now, this is how it looks if I add on a shitty CPL, like a cheap one. You can see we're just adding in extra flare and it's a mess. And then here, adding in the case CPL, you can see it's just radically improved. There's less flare, there's less ghosting, and we can see much more detail from those little twiggy things that we're focused on. Likewise, here's some image examples. Okay, so how can it be that a filter can have better coatings than a giant lens company's premium portrait lens? I think one of the reasons is that the filter is perfectly flat. That probably helps with controlling reflections, whereas most of your front lens elements are going to be convex or concave, not completely flat. And the other thing is that Case have been doing this for over a decade. They're leaders in filter technology, and they're not doing full lens designs. They're just focused on a piece of glass and the best possible coatings to get the results that they need. They pioneered magnetic filters back in the day. They've brought out so many different ranges of new technology, and this latest one, which is their Generation 3 CPL, they have a new way of applying the coatings to the filter. Traditionally, it's been applied whilst the glass is hot, but they've figured out a way, I don't know the technical parts, but basically they can apply their polarizing and their anti-reflection coatings and all of that stuff when the glass is actually cold. Now, by doing that, it means that they're eliminating the thermal expansion and contraction of the glass, which would ordinarily, you imagine it's warmed up and then you apply the coating and then it cools down, there's that slight contraction. It's going to cause warping or cracking or whatever that may be invisible to the naked eye, but it's not going to be a perfect surface on your coatings. Well, now they're able to do that. And according to Case, I've been talking to their boss. He's actually a friend of mine. I met him in Vegas and we chat fairly often because I like to nerd out about this stuff. Their coating is now so close to being perfectly flat and uniform that they're able to cut down the amount of light that's reflected by 20 to 30 times. Now it's 1/1000th of the light that hits can be reflected and the other 999 are passed through, whereas the typical filter, it's 20 to 30 parts per thousand that will be reflected. Fortunately, they're also nicely built. Also, the Gen 3 filters now have 20% more transmission and definition than previous generations, which means less loss of light and fine detail in your shots. It's great to see these kind of quality improvements taking place in an often overlooked segment of the photography market, that is, filters. I mean, let's be clear, you're not always shooting in hard light situations where those reflections are really going to be an issue for you. But if it's a situation where a CPL is useful, where you're dealing with those reflections, then you're potentially going to have the double benefit. And they've confirmed with me that this new low temperature application is something they're rolling out to the rest of their filter range, and the UV filters are already in production. So I guess I now need to refine my position statement on filters for 2024. I could say that most filters can't improve your image quality in terms of sharpness and contrast and flare. They can only hurt it, unless you have a high quality filter whose coatings are actually more effective at controlling reflections and flare than your front element of your lens actually is. In that case, they're able to potentially improve your image quality in hard light shooting situations, as well as giving you the creative effect that you're trying to get by using a filter in the first place. Pretty cool. Thank you to Case for sending out those new filters. Genuinely the best CPLs I've ever used. They're small, I didn't get vignetting with them. They have been dropped a couple of times. And as you saw from those demonstrations, there's nothing doctored there. The amount of reflection they're cutting out that was otherwise getting bounced around inside my lenses, it's remarkable. Let me know if you have any questions. Check out full details at the description below. You can also check out my Patreon to see behind the scenes on some of those different shoots that I showed you B-roll during this video. And I'll see you guys soon.